Columbia, Maryland. Hello, Emily. And Columbia, South Carolina. I have a sister in Columbia, South Carolina. Hi, Laura. I know there's more than 2 folks in here. There we go. Christina Pipkin, that's a familiar name. Hi, Christina. Okay, I want everybody to get familiar with the chat because we are going to use that. Just a little what was not in the bio, but you can see on screen. You can find me on social media pretty much everywhere. Everywhere I am at Almitra Berry. And I also have a podcast called the Educational Equity Emancipation Podcast that you can find everywhere where podcasts are, including on YouTube. All right, Hayward, California. I am actually from Stockton, California, originally, Diana. Born and raised in Stockton, worked with Hayward school systems on their middle school reading intervention implementation many years ago now. And I currently live in Houston, Texas. So I'm waiting to see, Christina's there from Houston. I'm looking for somebody else from Houston, but right now I got my sister's home, my original home neighborhood, and where I am now. So let's get going. We need you back. No. All right. So today I want you first, and hopefully you're all in a place that is safe and comfortable. If you're behind the wheel of a vehicle or something else, do not do this part. Otherwise, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes and sort of get rid of any background noise. Just bring yourself to a place that's quiet and peaceful. Because I want you to think about all the literature that you were given in your own K-12 experience as a child, starting with kindergarten all the way through high school. Think about those teacher read-alouds. We now call them shared reading. What about the books that you were given to read as part of your reading instruction, the literature, not just the basal reading series? I was a Dick and Jane kid, so we're not talking like Dick and Jane for those of you who are old enough to remember Dick and Jane. But all those narrative stories, all of the stories that you read all the way through high school. And as you think about those stories, I want you to think about the characters, the people that were in those stories. What were you exposed to? What literature was offered or suggested or required for you to engage in, for you to read? And as you think about that, and you think about those characters and stories, what resonated with you? What books and stories did you love? And why did you love them? What was in there? I also want you to think about whether or not there are any stories that you struggled to connect to, stories that didn't resonate with you. And think about the reasons that maybe those stories just didn't sit well with you, or why you weren't able to connect with them. And now I want you to open your eyes, and in the chat, I want you to write the name of the first book that came to your mind. Hopefully you're all still awake. And if you don't remember the title of the book, what was the book about, or the character in the book? I was a bit of a bookworm as a child. I was an avid reader. My first experience with my own choice of independent literature was Dr. Seuss and Aesop's Fairy Tales. And what I did was I took the card out of the Highlights magazine when I was at the dentist's office and I was 6 years old. And I filled out that card because if you filled out the card, it said that they would send you books. And so I took my nickel and I waited on the porch for the mailman to come that day. And back then, again, long time ago, a nickel for a postcard. But I gave the mailman my postcard and I gave him, and it was a him, I gave him my nickel because then he would put a stamp on it and mail it for me. And so several weeks later, these boxes started coming. And my mother was a little confused because she had not ordered boxes of books for me, but I had enrolled in my first book of the month club at age 6. And I remember just being excited about having my own books and reading my own stories. Even though the characters didn't connect to me, it was never anything that I was accustomed to. So it was like all of it was like a fantasy. And it wasn't until I was an adult when I realized that I had never been given books that connected to my life, to my lived experience, to my story. And so as I think about that, and I think about my experience and maybe some of your experiences, as we think about those books that we were required to read, think about whether or not maybe experiences or memories might be different if you are Asian, or what if you are Black, as I am, African American. Would what resonated with you might be a little bit different if perhaps you're a Latina? And what about those of you who might be members of the LGBTQ community? Would our memories, our stories, our connections to literature be a little bit different depending on who we are and how we identify and what our cultural backgrounds are? So when you think about the story that you saw, my first question is, did the protagonist in that story look like you? And you can chat yes or no. I said, nope. And I'm not looking at you, but my chat is up there. Yeah, I'll tell you, my one of the series that I started reading as I was very young, and it was, I remember a hand-me-down set of books that I received from the family where my aunt was the help, the nanny, the housekeeper. And their girls had the Nancy Drew series, and they gave me, as they aged out of them, they gave me those books. And I remember reading Nancy Drew, and I also remember there were so many things that I was confused about, like what was a rumble seat? I don't know why that one sticks to me, but I always remember there were things that existed in their world, in that world of Nancy Drew, that I just had no clue about. But I was a huge fan of mysteries and still am, because I love solving the problems. So I loved reading them, even though there were so many times when I just couldn't imagine a summer house, a beach house, going boating or sailing. These weren't things that existed in my world. And the protagonist certainly never looked like me. And the stories that you thought of, did the characters reflect your culture? Did that reflect your lived experience? Yeah. And when you read those stories, or you were those stories were read to you, could you easily connect, easily being the key word, because of your lived experience? So one of the challenges we have is understanding and developing cultural competence in educators in our classroom. And I'll define that by saying that cultural competence is not a thing, it's not a state of being, but it's a process. We become more and more culturally competent. And with that, we are able to respond respectfully and effectively to people of all cultures, of all languages, classes, races, ethnic backgrounds, religions, all of the diversity factors. And we can do that in a way that recognizes, affirms, and values the worth of the people and communities, and protect and preserve the dignity of those people and communities. I always say I'm very, very fortunate that I grew up where I did in California, because I grew up in, while it was a red line neighborhood, my neighborhood was culturally diverse. It's like our block was the UN. We had, remember, okay, early 60s, 70s, Black, Okie, white, people who had migrated to California from Oklahoma Dust Bowl. So they identified very specifically as being Okies. Mostly Mexican. At the time, we didn't have any other Central or South American folks in the neighborhood. So Black, Okie, Mexican, Filipino, Chinese, Japanese. And we all got along and we went to each other's houses and we understood each other's cultural backgrounds and cultural events and holidays. It was very different. And because of that, I feel like I had this amazing vicarious education about a multitude of cultures. And that's something that's needed in our classrooms, because that cultural competence is a foundation for teaching through a culturally responsive lens. And if we don't have that competence, if we don't start to develop that competence, our culturally responsive practices are performative. They're not authentic. Performative in that we do them because we've been told this is the thing to do, as opposed to being authentic. We do it because we understand it, we get it, we respect our children and all of their cultures and what they bring to school. And that authenticity is necessary if we're going to have meaningful change for those children in our classrooms that are most impacted by historical racism and by oppression. So culturally responsive practices describe teaching that is empowering to our learners, where they can use their own stories, their own cultural experiences, their knowledge, their skills, their attitudes. We look for things in a culturally responsive practice that are understanding of our learners' varied cultural beliefs and practices. We believe that every single child that comes to us can learn, and it's our responsibility to make sure that they do, that we hold high expectations for every single child that comes to us. We help them develop as individuals, setting personal goals, and we create that bridge between their in-school life and their out-of-school life. And that always makes me smile, because I think about how much more enriching those classrooms are compared to some of my experiences as a learner.